fight coming up this weekend between a couple of light heavyweights that are like high school kids going for a gap year. They're trying to find themselves. They're trying to end the losing streak. We have Kennedy Nzechukwu, the African Savage, representing Fortis MMA, taking on Glory MMA and Fitness's own Baby K, Carl Robertson. And when I look at this fight, Matt, I could boil this one down to like the old Fight Night Picks 2-minute videos where we just rushed through them and sounded like chipmunks, and then at the end we barfed out a pick and we
still do. The videos are just 10 minutes now.
Over and over and over again, and some people are cool with that, and I'm not. So when it comes down to this one, I'm going to give you the Cole's notes on Kennedy Nzechukwu's entire Dana White's Contender Series UFC career, and I'm going to do the same thing for Carl Robertson, because I can do this really quick. When you look at Kennedy Nzechukwu, he was 2-0. Making his Dana White's Contender Series debut. He won a split decision back years ago, and the promotion just decided, you know what? Joby Sanchez, that's the guy we want. Benito Lopez, give us him off of that episode. So that's what happened. Kennedy went out, had a giant year, and then he came back on to Dana White's Contender Series, and he fought, and I'm not joking, Dennis Bryant, and he was a minus 600 in that fight. He was 6-0, so he gained 3 fights outside of the promotion. They brought him back the next year. He gets a quick knockout win. If you remember those fights on Dana White's Contender Series, it's just Saif Saud yelling at Kennedy Nzechukwu, which you might say, well, Craig, I saw that last weekend when Uriah Hall fought. Yes, you did, and Saif Saud usually has to yell at those two men in particular the entire damn fight to get them to do anything. So for Kennedy, he wins that fight, he gets the UFC contract, he fights Paul Craig. It's halfway competitive until into the third round when Kennedy finds himself in a triangle choke, which is how Paul Craig wins just about every single fight against inept grapplers. And that's what happened. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. But hey, Magomed Ankalaev's done it. Nikita Krylov's done it. Jamal Hill's been in those positions. It happens. For Kennedy, it happens. So after that, we go through the weirdest part of his career. He fights Darko Stosic, and in all reality, he should have lost that fight 29-28. But that's not what happened, because for Darko Stosic, well, he lost 2 points due to low blows. So Kennedy gets a win. He realizes it's not just, it's not due. So then he goes out there and he takes another fight. You might go, okay, well, Craig, he beats Darko Stosic on a technicality. What does he do in his next fight? He knocks out Carlos Ulberg. You know, like Carlos Ulberg. That really happened. If you doubt me, it really happened. He withstood a ton of power and pressure in the first round. I don't know how he made it through, but Carlos Ulberg got beat in the second round. He fights Danilo Marquez, and somehow Marquez gets his back, but Carlos Ulberg is 6'5", and he just powers himself out of bad positions, and ultimately, he beats Danilo Marquez as that fight goes on. But for Kennedy, he lost to Dao Jung 2 fights ago, and he looked lost and listless in the cage when that fight started, and his last time out, he fought Nikolai Negumereanu. Most people thought he beat Negumereanu. I thought he beat Negumereanu, but he lost a split decision in that one, even though he had better volume and a lot of good power shots. So Nzechukwu looked decent in his last fight, but he has had the wonkiest UFC career.
Nick Negumereanu. He may have outstruck him. That's not great when we're talking about a guy who does have decent kickboxing. That's the thing about Kennedy. When he does put his strikes together, he does look like a natural striker, and that's so frustrating about him. You bring up Saif Saud yelling at him, and it is the truth. It's almost like he has to get hit a couple times before he really settles into the fight. And against a guy like Carl Robertson, it's not really a skill I want my fighter to have if I were Saif Saud, because you're almost going into this fight with the Carlos Ulberg game plan. It's, hey, we're going to have to hit a couple shots, but if we can just get past that early storm, then maybe we can pressure Robertson enough, get him up against the cage, do some damage with our volume. The problem is, I think Carl Robertson's a weird fighter, and anybody who's ever watched him fight will probably agree with me on that.
He's a kickboxer who gets submission wins.
He's a kickboxer who primarily gets submission wins. And that's the thing about Robertson. He's always a sneaky enough grappler if you're not really like a collegiate wrestler, if you're not a multiple-time black belt. Like, Robertson can be tricky enough on the mat, but the thing is, a lot of his own submission wins come from, I drop my opponent, I don't really want to jump into their guard or play around with the ground and pound very much, so I'm immediately going to try to cinch in a submission. And when he does go immediately from knockdown to back controller, knockdown to guillotine, it does look like a really good transition for him, and there's a really high-level things that fighters do. Like, the sign of a really high-level fighter is I can drop you on the feet and then submit you on the ground. Think of like Charles Oliveira. He's one of the best fighters in the world. That's what he excels at. Robertson's like the bare bones of that game, but without some of the extra intangibles that go in. And I do worry about what type of fighter we're going to see in Robertson in the second round and third round, because he does have a nice left hand. He does have a nice left high kick. but he doesn't really have a jab or a right hook or the other techniques that really set up that big shot. And that's what I worry about him in this fight. If he gets off to a really poor start against a guy like Kennedy, who again, it does take him a couple times to get hit, so maybe Carl won't have to worry about that really rough start. But still, let's say Carl finds himself in a tough fight where he's hit Kennedy a few times, now he's on the back foot. I just don't know what Roberson's plan B is going to be, because I don't think he's a good enough pure wrestler to get Nzechukwu down without dropping him on the feet first. So I think this fight's going to be really interesting after the first round, and I really do think that it's going to look a lot like the Alberg matchup.
I could see it being either the best round you've ever seen or the worst fight you've ever seen. And the reason being is Kennedy Nzechukwu can be a very tentative fighter as fights start. Carl Roberson is a low-output kickboxer that really waits on counters to throw power shots on those. And if you go back and you watch his first round and his last fight against Khalil Rountree, there's a little bit of back and forth, but most time in that first round, the guys are both in a mirror. They're waiting for the other guy to do something. And that was a southpaw versus southpaw matchup. And so is this. And Nzechukwu's a southpaw, as is Roberson. And it was interesting, too, because in 2021, that's when Roberson made the jump over to Glory MMA and Fitness. But if you watch his last fight, it's James Krause in the corner, but so is his head coach from Killa B, which is over on the East Coast. So two voices in the corner trying to get their point out. Obviously,
a super camp, perhaps, for Carl Roberson?
Well, if it was, he's on a 3-fight losing streak. And in his last fight against Khalil Rountree, it was 3 months ago. I've never seen a knockout beating that bad in a while. Like, you talk, Khalil dropped him once, and then he throws that soccer kick. Carl ends up back up. Then he gets dropped again, and he's completely finished. And Khalil's just pounding him out in the corner, as they say. But you look at it before that, I mean, a loss by submission of Brendan Allen, a loss by submission to Marvin Vittori, where you get overzealous and things are personal. Wins over Roman Kopylov and Wellington Turman. And I know Carl Roberson has a win over Darren Stewart, that at the time, that was a really big one. 15-second knockout over Ryan Spann, because Ryan Spann going for double legs against the cage, and every time he just gets knocked out, just like the Johnny Walker fight. But for Carl Roberson, I was almost promised to Bill Goods. I know he's a kickboxer. He was 0-3 in kickboxing, but he was the retirement fight on short notice for Jerome LeBanner, and he dropped him twice and somehow lost a mysterious decision. A loss to Dustin Jacoby in kickboxing, and a loss to Michael Lemaire. But for Roberson, that really is the epitome of his game. I know he has submission wins, but he sets things up on the feet to then finish it on the mat. He's kind of a guy that gets a little overzealous sometimes, but at the same time, he's so reserved. Honestly, I don't expect the world out of this fight.
I really do think Kennedy's going to run him over, if I'm being completely honest. Again, a big talking point that I like to bring up is who's going to lead the dance in the majority of their fights. Roberson might get off to a decent start, but other than a few single shots on the feet, I don't really know what he's going to do for sustained levels of success in this fight, because if he's not able to land that one big power shot, if he's not able to knock Kennedy out, I don't think he has the output to be in there in an ugly fight with Nzechukwu. And the thing is, if Kennedy needs a takedown, I think he might be able to get it and just lay on top, because for Roberson, he is a good grappler if he has his opponent hurt, but he's also a fish out of water off his back on the mat. So if Roberson gets dropped, I think he's going to find himself in a very similar position that Kennedy would if he found himself on the mat. This fight really just comes down to who's going to be more active and who's going to be more willing to eat a shot to give a shot. And I still think that's more likely to be Kennedy. Now, for Roberson, I got to be honest, if I didn't see his last performance against Khalil Rountree, I probably would have favored him in this fight a little bit, because up until that point, we'd only really seen him struggle with guys who can strike a little bit, but they really bread their butter on the mat, or butter their bread, on the mat. But for Roberson, to see a natural striker get outstruck by a guy who came into striking quite late into life, being Khalil Rountree, it was a little bit concerning. That's something I never like. You never want to see the specialist get beat at the thing that they specialize in. And for that reason, I do have to side with Kennedy.
I think that Carl Roberson looked really good. I mean, obviously he weighed in under the light heavyweight limit at 203 his last time out, but he couldn't make that weight cut to middleweight anymore. Too many botched weight cuts. You do realize he's at a disadvantage by 4 inches in height and 9 inches of reach. Kennedy Nzechukwu, though, is a guy that holds his hands in tight, and he's not a full extension type of guy. I know that Dennis Bryant knockout, he has that crazy head kick to get it, but he isn't a big rangefinder in his fights. He usually waits for his opponents to come at him. So, again, that is why I struggle thinking, geez, this one's going to be this all-action wild fight. If it is, it's probably going to end in the first round. If it's not, then, eat your pop and drink your popcorn, as they say. Getting it wrong the whole time. For Kennedy Nzechukwu, open to minus 125 as the favorite. Lines at par right now. Carl Roberson somewhere around a plus 105 at open. Par minus 110. We have a look at the fan vote. I haven't seen it, so it's of interest to us over on Topology. Surprised to us it is to you. I'm going to say over under 70% in Nzechukwu because 2 losses in a row is better than 3.
I'll say under, but still over 50%.
81% of 573 total voters going with Nzechukwu. 75% have Nzechukwu to win by knockout for the 19% that have Robertson. 40% by decision, 17% by the submission, and 35% by knockout. That is not an even number. But Matt, yeah, when I look at this one, I have Kennedy and Nzechukwu. It's more, there's a bill of goods out there. I'm going to try and get it, but I did like the volume out of Nzechukwu last time out against Negumereanu. I thought that he won that fight. The judges didn't, but overall, I think it's an opportunity for him to get the win. But if Kyle Robertson wins, if he's going to win, I would think he's going to get it done by finish in this one.
This is why weight classes in boxing are way better than weight classes in MMA, and I'm not afraid to admit this whatsoever. You know what's great about having weight classes every 6 pounds? Everybody fights at their optimal weight. Like, it's not like there's people who have to cut 10 pounds and other people are cutting 20 pounds because there's such a big difference in all these weight classes. You get the champions are normally fighting at their optimal weight class. For Carl Robertson, he could fight at like 187. Like, that's the problem. The weight cut is just like 1.5 pounds too difficult for him, and I really don't think he fits into this weight class at all. If you saw him physically against Khalil Roundtree Jr., who's not the tallest light heavyweight, but still a built 205er for sure, he looked really small against him. He did look rangy, don't get me wrong, but I think against Kennedy, he's really going to struggle in this matchup.
And against Glover Teixeira, he didn't have the best fight, but regardless,
He dropped him.
Both of us going with the man out of Texas, Kennedy Nzechukwu, to get the win in this one, and an interesting fight. I'd stay away from it personally because it is incredibly volatile between a couple of guys on tidy losing streaks. We have a couple of big-time fighters in this main event at lightweight. It is, holy smokes, Rafael Dos Anjos take on Rafael Fiziev. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.